The Human Voice Project, Stories Worth Hearing. When it was Saigon, this is the director's cut. We're at episode 5, A War and Life Along the Way. Hi, Coach Gary Micheloni here, and welcome back to the Human Voice Project. As we say, stories worth hearing because every voice has a story and every story has a voice. So today we continue our director's cut of When It Was Saigon. And as I said before, one of the things I've come to appreciate while narrating this anthology is that these stories aren't simply about combat. They're about life. They're about young men arriving in a place they'd only heard about, learning new jobs, and forming lifelong friendships, meeting unexpected challenges, and discovering strengths that they never knew they had. The Vietnam War changed every one of these veterans, yet through it all, they remained remarkably human, with moments of courage and humor and friendship and a resilience that still resonate today. And while I'm thinking about it, if you haven't already received your complimentary Director's Cut companion guide, simply stop by thehumanvoiceproject.com. We'd love to welcome you to the Human Voice Project community. But enough about me. I've got 5 veterans, great folks that you just have to meet. Our first story is from Sergeant Dick Anderson, United States Air Force. In Deployment, a Life-Changing Event, he reflects on how a military deployment can alter the course of a life in ways no one could have anticipated. Next, we'll meet Staff Sergeant Chuck Dean, United States Army. Now, Chuck is the editor of our book and put all of the pieces together. He was with the 82nd Airborne Division. In Bait and Switch on Trudeau Street, he shares a story that reminds us how quickly expectations could change after arriving in Vietnam and how adaptability became an essential part of military life. Our third veteran is Sergeant Don Meyer, United States Army, 101st Airborne Division. In A Cherry in Ban Me To It, we experience Vietnam through the eyes of a newcomer, discovering what it meant to be the new guy, the cherry, in an unfamiliar and often unpredictable environment. And next, we'll hear from Sergeant Richard Bergquist, United States Army, 101st Airborne Division. In Door Gunner, he introduces us to one of the most demanding and dangerous jobs of the war, offering a first-hand perspective from the skies over Vietnam. And finally, we'll meet Sergeant Bruce Kelly, United States Army, 9th Infantry Division. His story, Jeep Hood Pizzeria, reminds us that even in wartime, people found creative ways to build friendships, share a laugh, and hold on to a sense of normalcy. 5 veterans, 5 remarkable stories, 5 very different experiences, and 27 stories worth hearing. We'll begin with them now. Thank you for joining me. Now, let's listen. I'm Coach Gary. Chapter 19, Marching to a Different Drum. Kim Bok Nam, NCO. Republic of Korea, ROK, Army. White Horse Division, Vietnam, 1968. After arriving by LST from Korea to Vietnam, I was assigned the task of identifying enemy weaponry that had been seized by friendly forces, and this job took me to many combat areas. My job was ordnance specialist, and I saw too much misery and suffering. I went there in 1968 under orders from my government to fight a war, and today I still weep because of the destruction that I saw in Vietnam. My name is Kim Bok Nam. Since fighting in Vietnam for the Republic of Korea Army, White Horse Division, I have come to meditate on how guilty I feel about the damage and destruction to life and civilization that I saw and participated in while I was there. The faces of the Vietnamese people and the captured enemy soldiers, and the terrible things that I saw our friendly soldiers do to them, are what I now see in my memories of that war. It is easy to remember and reflect on the dreadful results of war, especially when you are there as a combatant. I had many days and nights of watching and enduring the horrible things that man can do to man when he is angry and greedy. Not only did we in the White Horse Division, ROK, fight daily battles against the enemy soldiers, but we fought against the heat and malaria constantly. At times, the combat was fierce, and we had heavy casualties from the enemy's hit-and-run tactics, which is the backbone of guerrilla warfare. No war should be allowed on the earth again. One day I even witnessed friendly intelligence soldiers torturing prisoners to get them to give up secret information. And then I saw other soldiers cut off ears from the dead and put them in alcohol bottles and hang them around their waist, as if for something to brag about. It was gruesome mishaps like this that haunted my memories for many years after coming home. I returned home with tremendous pangs of guilt because of the killing I had witnessed, and I began to pray that God would allow me to do something to ease my conscience. In 1989, I went back under a new set of orders. I am now a Christian pastor, and nearly 20 years after fighting in Vietnam, I went back and I apologized to the Vietnamese people for the things that I and my government had done to them. Though many years have passed, the ruins of war remain across Southeast Asia. I think the orphanages and wounded soldiers' hospitals bring the most pain to my heart now. The conditions in these places are horrible. Seeing this, I asked God to forgive me, and He did, and then sent me back to do relief work in those war-torn countries. I feel that I must carry the love of Jesus Christ back to these poor people so their sore and wounded spirits can finally heal. Chapter 20, Close Calls. Dennis Wehunt, U.S. Army. Wheel Vehicle, Track Mechanic, Sergeant E5, 23rd Artillery Group, Battalion Maintenance, Phao Loi, Vietnam, 6 of the 27th Artillery, 175 and 8-inch self-propelled howitzer, Phu Loi, 5th of the 42nd Artillery, 155 towed howitzer, Plantation, Vietnam, 1971 to 1972. A fire support base, FSB, is a military encampment designed to provide indirect artillery fire support to infantry units operating in areas beyond the normal range of direct fire support from their own base camps. The contact team of mechanics I was with had been sent out to help move Fire Support Base Andrews 12 miles closer to the Cambodia border to establish the new FSB Warrior. Our 8-inch gun fired support for the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and the area we were moving to was considered a very hot AO. We had been told that the 11th ACR had lost some men clearing the road the week before. We were making our last trip of the day when the VTR, Versatile Track Wrecker, we were moving, broke down in a large mud hole. The fuel pump had gone out, so we radioed in to let our CO know what was going on. A few minutes passed, and we received a call that a new pump was being flown out. As we sat there, the locals began to gather. 2 of the truck drivers pulled their trucks close together and stretched a tarp between them to get out of the sun. I noticed that 2 ARVN soldiers were getting a little too close to the truck, and saw that one was showing the other one that he had a grenade under his shirt on his belt. He was acting like he was going to throw it into the area where our guys were, and I called him out. He pulled the grenade off his belt and he started to pull the pin. We fired a couple rounds over his head, so he backed away to the edge of the road and then ran down a path into the elephant grass. We were not in the safest area to have a breakdown. Shortly afterwards, a chopper arrived with a fuel pump, and when we installed it, it also turned out to be faulty. Then someone came up with the idea that maybe we could hook onto the VTR with the two 5-ton trucks and pull it out of the mud hole and just tow it on up to the FSB. Even with both trucks in 4-wheel drive, we could not budge the VTR. And with all the vehicles coming and going, the road was slippery. It was getting late in the afternoon when we called the CO again. At that point, the CO decided that we were going to have to pull guard duty for the night on the VTR. We were all worried because we were sitting ducks in the middle of the road, and it was starting to get dark. An hour or so later, we received a call from the CO with new orders. He felt that the area was too dangerous for the 5 of us to spend the night. So he ordered us to leave the VTR and drive on up to the new FSB. The sun had gone down, and no one was supposed to be traveling those roads after dark. It had started to rain a little, and the cloud cover had blocked any light that we might get from the moon. Just before reaching FSB Warrior, we came into an area of rubber trees in the village of Trong Bang. The fog had become very thick and mysterious, and with our lights off, it scared the hell out of all of us. About the time we were going through the center of Trong Bang, we ran into a patrol of soldiers. They did not look like any of the ARVN soldiers that we were used to seeing in this area. They were walking on both sides of the road in single file, just a couple yards apart. It was almost like they didn't see us, but we knew they did. They were as surprised as we were and disappeared into the fog as fast as they appeared. Just as we left the village, we were fired on from the local ARVN compound. Friendly fire. I'm sure they had no idea who we were, and luckily no one was injured. At this spot earlier in the day, I remember seeing this big billboard alongside the road that had a picture of a soldier being blown up by a booby trap, and the caption read in English and Vietnamese, "Extreme danger beyond this point." We finally made it to FSB Warrior late that night, and as we neared the FSB, we radioed them that we were just a quarter mile from the front entrance. The fog was hanging close to the ground, and we could only see about 20 feet in front of our gun jeep. With a sigh of relief, we made it. 2 GIs from the 11th ACR then pulled back the rolls of razor wire and moved their claymores so we could drive in. It was a safe feeling to be inside the perimeter, which was made up of tanks and APCs. We slept next to our 8-inch gun the rest of the night, and the next morning we began getting things in order so we could make the trip back down to the old FSB to pick up the broke-down VTR. This morning, however, we had a couple APCs with us to pull security, and they were also going back to blow up the old bunkers and any remnants that could be used by the enemy. As we pulled up to the mud hole where we had left the VTR, we could not believe our eyes. It was gone. There were marks going down the road from the tracks, and there were a lot of water buffalo tracks on the road. We were just about to follow the tracks when we heard a Jeep coming up the road, and it was an ARVN Jeep with 3 soldiers in it, 2 Vietnamese and 1 American. They were from a radio relay station down the road, and they said they had our VTR. It turns out that they had stopped a group of civilians that had hooked their water buffalo to the VTR with some large rope and pulled the heavy VTR down the road about 1.5 miles before they were stopped. We couldn't believe it, but we were thankful that another fuel pump that worked arrived shortly, and we were on our way. Later, we were told we were going to convoy out to one of our fire bases and rescue everyone and all the equipment. We weren't told why we were rescuing them, only that we would be going up and back on the same day. This FSB was located in the Parrot's Beak area. The base was located at one end of an airfield, and as we got close, we could hear artillery firing. When we rounded a corner, we could see that the artillery fire was coming from an ARVN compound that was next to our base. As soon as we stopped, guys from RFSB started loading their belongings onto our trucks, and at the same time a couple big shit hooks, large helicopters, landed. They would lift our 2 guns out of the area. As we spoke with the GIs from the base, they informed us that the ARVN soldiers were all very sick and that we should not get close to them. We finished loading everything we could get on our trucks and headed back to Plantation. We had 6 trucks and a 5-ton wrecker plus the CO's Jeep. We also had 2 quad 50-gun trucks, one in the middle of the convoy and the other one would bring up the rear. The dust was so bad that we had to stay back from the truck ahead so we didn't run into each other. We hadn't gone but a few miles when we met an ARVN Ranger company heading up to reinforce the ARVN company that was under heavy attack. There were 5 or 6 trucks loaded with ARVN soldiers. I was on our wrecker next to the last vehicle in our convoy, and the truck just ahead of us in the convoy ran into the side of one of the ARVN trucks, damaging their rear axle. As soon as the dust cleared, we started to pull the truck apart to see how we could fix it. All of a sudden, a Vietnamese officer showed up before we knew what was going on, and we were surrounded by these ARVN Rangers with their M16s locked and loaded and pointing at us. The officer came to me and pulled out his .45, put it to my head, and began screaming, "You're responsible!" As luck would have it, the last vehicle in our convoy had been hanging back because of all the dust, and it happened to be one of the quad 50 gun trucks. When the driver saw what was happening, he slid his truck sideways in the road, and they were in a perfect firing position. The ARVN troops then backed down and moved on as we pulled the 2 trucks apart and went on our way. I'm not sure what would have happened to us if it had not been for that gun truck. When we made it back to Plantation, the rest of the convoy had no idea what had happened to us, but knew what a close call we had had and how lucky we were to get out alive. As we pulled into our compound, we were ordered to stay in the motor pool area. We had been quarantined for 10 days. They lined us all up and gave us shots, and as with many things in Nam, we were never told what the shots were for. Dennis Wehunt served in Vietnam in 1971 to 1972 and retired from Weyerhaeuser Paper Company after 37 years as a millwright. He and his wife have been together 45 years. They have a great son and daughter-in-law, daughter and son-in-law, and 5 grandchildren. They currently live in Aurora, Oregon. Chapter 21. How Far We've Come. Valerie Vigil, Senior Master Sergeant, U.S. Air Force. U.S. Air Force retired 1969 to 1995. As written by Valerie Vigil. I had just returned home after completing my freshman year of college. It was June of 1969, and I had some decisions to make. Go back to school, transfer to another school, give it up, or just try something different. And although the Vietnam War was winding down, I decided after much serious thought that I wanted to be a part of it, or at least try to be a part of it. So, unbeknownst to my parents, I began checking into the armed services. Other than my daddy serving in the Navy during World War II, the only other military influences within the family were my cousins' husbands. One had served in the Army and the other in the Air Force. Considering where the Air Force had taken him, I decided I would explore that option. I was surprised when I found my recruiter to be so amazingly honest. He even went so far as to provide me with an opportunity to speak with other ladies that had recently been to basic training. They were all now at technical school at a base near my home. In those days, females in the Air Force were known as WAF, W-A-F, Women in the Air Force. In jest, it was described to me as being part of the Fair Force. However, there was a prerequisite for me to enlist. I must have both parents sign for me to join. The reason being is because I was under the age of 21 and the career fields I was eligible for would be limited. It was a struggle with Daddy, but after the better part of 6 weeks of convincing him that this would be a good thing, he finally, but very hesitantly, signed the papers. Mother was all for it from the beginning and thought it was a wonderful opportunity for me. I enlisted under the Delayed Enlistment Program and was not expecting to leave until January of 1970. However, greater plans have been laid because on the 16th of October, 1969, the day the New York Mets won the World Series, and just as the game ended on TV, there was a knock on the door. Opening up, I was surprised to see my recruiter. He had come with the news of an opening for me. I would be leaving the following morning. Thinking back, it was probably the best way to start my Air Force adventure because there was no real time to think about it and no prolonged goodbyes with family. So, on October 17th, 1969, I stepped onto a plane for the first time in my life and headed for basic training in San Antonio, Texas. At basic training, we were instructed in the same materials and techniques as the males, except everything was separate. Our dormitories were far away from the male dormitories, and our training instructors, TIs, were all female. There was very little contact or interaction with any males on the post. When the time came for the assignment of our Air Force Specialty Codes, AFSC, I learned that 4 other women and I would be the first females put into the Aerospace Medicine 901XO career field. We were going to be a test group that the Air Force was starting as a means of expanding opportunities for the increasing WAF population. As I learned more about this field, I grew more and more excited. After all, we would be taking care of the flying population, such as pilots and navigators, radio operators, boom operators, and gunners, just to name a few. How special was that? The other 4 ladies and I completed our basic medical fundamentals course at Shepherd Air Force Base, which is just north of Wichita Falls, Texas, and then proceeded on to Brooks Air Force Base, Texas, for the 901XO training. This presented another learning situation for all the students and instructors because there had never been any females on the course. As it all washed out, we succeeded and made it through our training and were immediately set off to begin our Air Force careers as 901s. My first assignment was at Plattsburgh Air Force Base, New York. I arrived there in January of 1970, and the NCOIC of the office was a master sergeant. He had been there for a long time, was very set in his ways. I will always remember him being in his Class A uniform every day without fail. He was definitely a proud military career man. On the first day, I walked into the office and was met by a staff sergeant that seemed amused to see me. All the office personnel had received advance notice that I was coming, and for some reason I had this suspicion that they really thought I would not show up. When the NCOIC walked around the corner and saw me, the first words out of his mouth were, "What the hell am I going to do with you?" Stunned, I didn't know what to do or what to say. To say that I was intimidated is putting it mildly, since I was so unsure of myself at the time. The staff sergeant behind the desk tried to make light of the NCOIC's comment and immediately rose and introduced himself and the others. I appreciated his gesture because it was a nice attempt at easing my obvious anxiety. And then I overheard someone say, "She'll look good behind the front desk." And so my time at the flight surgeon's office began. As time went on, along with all the challenges, came more opportunities. When an air rescue and recovery squadron was started at Loring Air Force Base, Maine, my counterpart and I were given the opportunity to become crew members. It was another first for females in the Air Force career field. We would need to meet the same training requirements as the men, and we did, and again there were many skeptics, but the trainers were great. loaded with ingenuity and desire to make it all come together. It was just the beginning of the many opportunities offered to me during my career. It should be noted that by the end of my first enlistment, of the 5 females that began this adventure, I was the only one left on active duty. Thankfully, doors had been opened now for many, and very talented, dedicated women have followed behind to excel in every field that they have gone into. My 26-year career took me to many places and provided experiences that will stay with me always. I was able to work with the SR-71 Blackbird spy aircraft program, served as a crew member in the AWACS program, and with special operations. I experienced some special duty assignments, and then coming full circle, finished my career back in a flight surgeon's office as superintendent. Was I a trailblazer? Perhaps. But I do know the women that have followed me in our career field were and are dynamic individuals. Most of the opportunities that were afforded to me will never be available for them. But if they are, I know they will succeed. I have to smile now when I think that many of the younger ladies have never even heard of or been referred to as a WAF. Yes, we've come a long way. Valerie Vigil. Valerie Vigil was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. Following her 26-year Air Force career, she continued serving the military community through her work with Tri-West Healthcare Alliance for 13 years. She now resides in Henderson, Nevada, where she enjoys volunteering with the USO in Las Vegas, sharing time with friends, doing lots of reading, and traveling as much as possible. Chapter 22. How to say a dumb thing and still get the job. Jack Kelly, Captain, U.S. Army, Company Commander, A Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Airborne Infantry, Vietnam, 1966. It was January of 1967, and several of the officers had gathered at the 173rd Airborne Brigade headquarters at Bien Hoa. I had recently turned over my company, Company A, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, to Captain Ed Carnes and reported to the brigade headquarters for a new job. I would be working for Major Jerry Bethke, the Brigade S1, as his assistant S1. As this was occurring, a new general for the brigade had arrived, and Brigadier General Paul Smith was turning over his command. The new CG was Brigadier General John R. Dean, and the word was out that he was searching for someone to be his aide-de-camp. I'm not sure why Major Bethke, unbeknownst to me, had thrown my name in the hat and nominated me for the position. I, along with several other captains and lieutenants, was summoned to the CG's office to be interviewed by General Dean. When it came to my turn to be interviewed, the general asked many questions about my background. He began with where I had gone to college. My answer was the Citadel. He queried me about my duty and how long I had commanded Company A. He went on to ask a number of other questions dealing with my time as a company commander. And then the fateful question came. He asked that, if in the event I was selected, would I be interested in serving as his aide? If I was interested? I was not interested, and now I was going to have to let him know. I braced myself and replied, "No, sir, I am pleased that you would consider me for this duty, but I have just become the Assistant S1 and I'm still learning how to do that job." I was not sure what he thought of my answer, but he concluded the interview and excused me from his office. Sometime later, I got back to my office, ready to settle into my new job at S1, and went in to see Major Bethke. He asked how the interview went, and I shared the details with him, including me telling the general that I had to decline his offer for the job because I had a new job at S1. Bethke seemed slightly astonished. "So you told the general no?" I went over that part of the interview again, repeating what I had told the general. The major chuckled and then announced, "Well, the general just called and informed me that you had told him that you didn't want the job." Still chuckling, he then told me, "Guess what? You got the job. You're the new aide." I was pretty much blown away with the news, but it turned out to be the highlight of my 20-year Army career. The new job was just like that, a new job. Like many of you in the military, there seemed to always be a forever changing of jobs and getting readjusted to new equipment, methods, and bosses. Being a new aide was just that, and plus. As the general's aide, I got involved in a very special way at all levels in the brigade, from platoon, company, to battalion. My main communications, as company commander, were with the 4 platoon leaders in the company commander, the battalion commander, and his staff. While flying with the general in his chopper, my primary job was to receive all calls and know a myriad of call signs, and, if appropriate, pass them on to the general, the old man, or inform them of where else they might need to address their messages. The equipment was a challenge. Before, at company level, there had been only 2 Prick 25 radios, one on the battalion command net, the other with company elements. I was lucky to have 2 exceptional RTOs that manned those radios. Now there was a stack of radios bolted into the helicopter to enable the general to reach whoever he needed to reach, and there was just me to respond to those incoming messages. Fortunately, the old man was patient, and I was so thankful that he was. Each morning we lift off early and remain out all day, not returning until dusk. Often we'd take off again during the night and remain up for all hours when there was contact or other activity in the area of operations. Our pilot was Captain Rod Beasley, and his co-pilot was Warrant Officer Grover Hudgens, 2 professional and exceptional aviators. We would be everywhere in an area of operations that the general felt there was a need for his presence. This included visiting the various units and troops on the ground, checking out defensive positions, talking to commanders and their troops, and visiting hospitals. During the hospital visits, whether a general hospital or one of the MASH units, I'd always carry a box of Purple Hearts. It was a very proud moment when visiting 173rd Casualties to stand there beside the old man while he took a Purple Heart and pinned it on a trooper, and to then thank him for his service. Of course, when we would return to base camp, it was my job as well to make sure that those awards were recorded with personnel. The general was a special man and had a great sense of humor. On one particular night, I got to experience it fully, and the interesting thing is that the joke was on him. Soon after we lifted off in his chopper to oversee a night operation, some nurses from the 3rd Surgical MASH unit at our base camp crept into the general's hooch and short-sheeted his bed. As the prank materialized, when he got back, the general cracked up and could not stop laughing. The next day, the humor continued, but so did the security. It was increased to a new level. After all, for nurses to be able to sneak into his quarters like that brought concern to those responsible for his safety. The general stayed amused by the ambush for a long time after. War is hell. Most folks who knew and worked for the general called him General, or Uncle Jack, or Parachute 6 on the radio. Being his aide, I had a close and personal relationship, but simply called him Sir. I was impressed that even with all my faults and shortcomings, we managed to get along so well, and to this day, I'm amazed that it was so easy for him to overlook his aide's flaws and weaknesses, but perhaps that was one of his strong suits that later led him to become a 4-star general in the U.S. Army. General Dean was one outstanding officer, mentor, and an officer who loved his troops, and I loved him, the finest officer I have known. On August 13, 2013, as an ordained minister, I had the privilege of officiating the general's funeral. It was conducted at West Point, and there was a great sadness in me at his passing. However, the good news is that I'll see him again in heaven. Praise the Lord. And yes, sometimes we do say the stupidest things like, "No, I don't want the job, sir." And then it turns out to be gold dust. Jack Kelly was born in Orlando, Florida on July 8, 1937. A member of the Boy Scouts of America, he was awarded the Eagle Scout badge. He graduated from the Citadel in 1959 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant of infantry in the United States Army. In December of 1979, he retired from the U.S. Army as a lieutenant colonel after 20 years of service. He commanded parachute infantry units at platoon, company, and battalion level, and his last two assignments were as a battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division, and finally as deputy commander, 5th Special Forces, Green Berets. Jack was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters, and a V device for valor, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. He has earned master's degrees from both American University and Central Michigan, served as a certified financial planner, CFP, and as an adjunct professor at both Webster University and Campbell University. Jack served as the executive director of men's ministries of the Pentecostal Holiness Church, IPHC, a position he held from 1985 to 2005. The All-American Airborne Awards Organization recognized him as the 173rd Airborne Brigade Association Man of the Year. In June 2016, he was recognized by the Secretary of the Army as a distinguished member of the 503rd Infantry Airborne Regiment. He is currently a member of the Bragg chapter of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. Jack and his wife, Lynn, are members of the Northwood Temple Church, where he served on the church staff from 1981 to 1985 as an associate pastor. They live in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Chapter 23, A Funeral for Remembrance, or so it seems. Michael Patrick Brewer, USMC, Mortar Platoon Squad Leader, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Air Wing, MAG 16, Vietnam, 1968 to 1969. How, for God's sake, will I ever be able to write about one of the most defining experiences of my tour in Vietnam when I have been diagnosed with neurogenic amnesia from a combat-related head injury? By trying. So, here goes. Near the very beginning of my tour of duty in 1968 with the 7th Marines on Hill 10 in Quang Nam Province in the Republic of Vietnam, in an area known as Dodge City and Arizona Territory, I was assigned to stand watch over an NVA woman who was a prisoner of war captured that sweltering hot jungle day when Marines were on patrol. The assignment seemed simple and was clearly relegated to the F&G, effing new guy. It is evident that someone needed to watch a POW or they may flee. Why me? There was no training for this duty, no military occupational skill. This woman was neither restrained nor placed in any quarters. It was just me and her glaring at one another. Two humans with eyes of sadness dedicated to killing one another. So here I am, trained to be submerged in the Vietnam War as a lean, mean killing machine. I am sitting on a wire milk crate, gazing into the deep, dark brown, dilated eyes of a squatting woman who is the prettiest woman I have ever seen. Ivory skin, high cheekbones, long, shiny black hair. She offers me a small book of her poetry. There was no one watching me watch her. I am alone, and there are no Marines in sight at the front gate of Hill 10. I have no specific instructions for this task, and I am becoming mesmerized by the gaze of this woman, even a bit disoriented, as it was my third week in country. Marine boot camp training kicked in. Not sure how long it took, but the blustery voice of my drill sergeant seized the moment. Do not ever engage or involve yourself with a Vietnamese woman, as you will not know whose side they may be on. They have razor blades in their vaginas, and never accept a cold Coke, as it will have ground glass on the bottom. I instantly snapped out of my mini-fugue state that I now know this highly trained NVA soldier was skilled at creating. This woman is here to kill me, says my newly combat-indoctrinated brain. It was on that day I entered the real war and became numb to all polite society and the inner altar boy. After 35 years of seeing this woman's face in my dreams, I addressed the boogeyman in a PTSD 19-day educational program at the Tucson VA Hospital on December 3, 2001. It was the same date that I entered the Marine Corps in 1967, and the same date in 1968 that I was sent out on Operation Meade River, the largest helicopter assault in the history of the war. I was a mortar man, and somewhere, somehow, I would incur a concussion from incoming enemy mortar rounds. I am told that I was unconscious for an indefinite period of time, with white pus oozing from my ears. Other than periodic evening nightmares of being glued up against the mortar pit, alone, like a human sandbag, clasping at my rosary, while listening to enemy rounds being stair-stepped in on my position. And then silence. I recall nothing from December 3, 1968 to March 10, 1969. I was then transferred to the 1st Marine Air Wing, MAG 16, for military police and perimeter security duty. Poof, gone, a memory that was suddenly KIA. My hope was that the 19-day PTSD program would help retrieve that lost arc of my tour. The VA neuropsychology doctors informed me that there is no index card to be placed in your filing cabinet. There is no meme, so do not try to retrieve it. So the unbided, unannounced amnesia subsumed the place of myself for those 90 days. That cloud of unknowing lingered for 3 decades, accompanied by a confused, quizzical, unfocused, and obsessive state of mind to the point of wondering if it ever happened. I had often wondered if Rod Serling wrote my life script. There is a reason I have always been fond of a phrase that Tim O'Brien, the award-winning author of The Things They Carried, would tag on the end of his combat narrative. He would say, "Or so it seems." This is what is meant by parallel lives for veterans of war. Way down there in that poor little amygdala, deep in our bird brain bank of war, live experiences that may well be locked away for life. When a veteran says, "I can't talk about it," there is a possibility that there is a neurophysiological component to that oft-heard comment. They cannot speak of it because the conscious mind cannot access it. We have come a long way in this arena, and it is now well known to be a symptom of TBI, traumatic brain injury, a signature wound of our past 16 years of war. I learned decades later at a battalion Marine reunion that many of those POWs, such as the one I was guarding, were assassinated following their interrogation in the rear. That's war, says an old breed Marine. Those RVN and Korean Marine interrogators were not given copies of the Geneva Accords. The residual altar boy in me says, good thing we are a moral nation and do not do anything like that. But then, we never stopped it either. It's called culpability. Fast forward to another one of our Marine reunions for 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and I am kibitzing in the lobby of the Washington, D.C. hotel. Many attendees are gathered, and I am sharing the experience of my POW watch duty when a former S2 intelligence officer overhears me and chimes in, "Was that you, Brewer, who was guarding that woman?" "Yes, sir," I crisply answered, with the tag, "I was scared shitless that day when the starkness and sullen truth of war hit me like a sucker punch. I was thinking this woman is here to kill me, and there is no one around to watch." The officer says, "Job well done, Marine. Did you know that she was one of the biggest catches of the war? She had letters of commendation on her from Ho Chi Minh praising her for all of the Marines she dusted." It was this experience that initiated me to the induced emotional numbness that had a 40-year half-life. Ron Capps, author of Writing War, states, "Man's problems are puny bantams, small and irrelevant when viewed against a force of nature or against a world at war. Ironically, without forethought, and mostly resulting from the procrastination that is inherent in writing about war, this is being completed on December 3rd, 2017, 49 years after my memory was KIA." Michael Patrick Brewer was in 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in Quang Nam Province on Hill 10, south of Da Nang, in 1968 and 69. He was raised in Dixon, Illinois, and moved to Tucson, Arizona in 1959. He attended nursing school at University of Arizona on the GI Bill and later majored in philosophy and religious studies with a Bachelor of Science in Business and Sports Management. He was a B-licensed soccer coach for 24 years and part owner and manager of Tucson's Amigos USL soccer franchise. He was a blogger of Tucson Citizen, a Gannett-owned paper, Veteran Veritas, which is currently carried by DesertNewsPost.com. Michael is the past state coordinator for Point Man Ministries of Arizona and a retired commercial property manager and private investigator. He is a past commandant of Apple Valley Marine Corps League and currently their chaplain and VSO. He is a member of VVA, VFW, DAV, and American Legion. Michael is married to Lydia Diane Benson Brewer with 3 children, 3 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. They currently reside in Crestline, California.